Ladies and gentlemen, I am your host, Jeffrey Lazarus, and you are watching Let's Play Dark Souls on the Gaming Vector. So a few things I want to say before we start. Number one, I am by no means a Dark Souls pro. I have completed the game before, so I do know the world and the storyline and where we should be going and shouldn't be going. But with all that being said, we probably will still have some deaths and probably still take some stupid damage and whatnot, so just keep that in mind. Try not to be too harsh on me here. So let's go ahead and get started. And we are going to start a new game. And first thing we want to do is name our character. We're going to keep this very, very simple, and we're just going to name him Jeffrey. Now, we have to create our class, so obviously sex, male or female abilities are not affected. We're going to be going with male. Class, there is a variety of different classes here. Some of your typical archetypes, such as warrior with high strength and dexterity, knights with high HP and heavy armor, so on and so forth. But the one we are actually going to be playing is the pyromancer. And the pyromancer is interesting because they get to wield magic, but they don't need to have a high intelligence stat to do so, unlike the sorcerer. They're also pretty handy in melee combat. Now, the nice thing about Dark Souls is with the leveling system, the way you level up individual stats, we can kind of turn this into whatever kind of character we want by the time we're done. But for now, we're just going to start with the basic pyromancer. As you can see, we start with a cracked round shield, an axe, and we've got some tattered looking robes. So the next thing we have to choose is a starting gift. Now there are a bunch of these. Let's just run through them really quickly. Goddess Blessing, Black Fire Bombs, and Twin Humanities are all consumable items. You'll find these throughout the game just through a normal playthrough, and to be honest, aside from the Twin Humanities and Black Fire Bombs, Goddess Blessing isn't really all that useful in the long run. Black Fire Bombs can be useful from time to time, and Twin Humanities, humanity is always useful. We'll get into why later on. The next two items we have are the binoculars and the pendant. The binoculars you can literally find about 5 minutes after you leave the tutorial area, and they are actually pretty useless. The pendant, also trinket with no effect. And that is true. It has absolutely no effect in the game. People have tried for a very long time to figure out what it actually does. It does nothing. So down here at the bottom we have the Master Key, Tiny Being's Ring, and Witch's Ring. Now let's talk about the two rings. Number one, the Tiny Being's Ring has an incorrect descriptor here. It does not slowly recover HP. Instead, it just gives you a small HP bonus, and there are different rings you can find later on that will actually help out much more than this one will. The Old Witch's Ring is a story and lore item. You need it to be able to talk to a specific NPC and get some more backstory about the world, but that's not something I'm really interested in. We're going for proficient gameplay here for the most part. So we're going to be taking the Master Key. This will allow us to open up basic locks, and this will give us some kind of extra shortcuts and backdoors into areas, things like that. So now for physique, we're just going to stick with average. For the face, we are going to go with the face of the heretics from the Great Swamp, because that is where the pyromancers hail from. As you can see, you have Xena, Karim, Katarina, Thorland, the Dragon Scholars, which are from Vinheim, the Nobles of Astora, the Delta Farmers, and the Far East Travelers. These are all different places that are mentioned in the game and are part of the lore, but they don't have a very big impact on what's happening. And then we are going to simply go with, let's give him red hair. Seems reasonable for a pyromancer. Now, with the face customization, you can go in and do deeper customization if you wanted to change the nose or change the eyes, so on and so forth, but I'm pretty happy with just the basic stock faces. We're not going to be looking at his face very much anyway. So we're going to go ahead and accept, start the game. Now, there will be a cutscene. There'll actually be kind of two back-to-back. there'll be a loading screen in between. Once both those cutscenes are done, we'll be able to get into some gameplay. So sit back, enjoy the cutscenes, and I will be back with you when it's time to actually play.
In the age of ancients, the world was unformed, shrouded by fog. A land of grey crags, arch trees, and everlasting dragons. But then there was fire, and with fire came disparity. Heat and cold, life and death, and of course, light and dark. Then from the dark they came and found the souls of lords within the flame. Nito, the first of the dead. The Witch of Izalith and her daughters of Chaos. Gwyn, the Lord of Sunlight, and his faithful knights. And the furtive pygmy, so easily forgotten. With the strength of lords, they challenged the dragons. Gwyn's mighty bolts peeled apart their stone skills. The witches weaved great firestorms. Nito unleashed a miasma of death and disease. And Seath, the Scaleless, betrayed his own, and the dragons were no more. Thus began the Age of Fire. But soon the flames will fade, and only dark will remain. Even now, there are only embers. And man sees not light, but only endless nights. And amongst the living are seen carriers of the accursed dark side. Yes, indeed. The dark sign brands the undead. And in this land, the undead are corralled and led to the north. Where they are locked away to await the end of the world. This
Okay, so as you can see, we have actually made it to some gameplay. That knight dropped this corpse through, which has the key to our dungeon cell. We'll actually run into him a little bit later. But for the time being, let's go ahead and get out of here. Now, the first thing you'll notice is these messages on the ground. These are tutorial messages here, but later on in the game, we'll be able to read messages left by other players, as well as leave our own messages. Now, you'll see these undead, what they call hollows. These guys have lost their humanity and gone insane. And these guys are not aggressive at the moment. However, we will run into lots and lots of aggressive ones later on. So what we're going to do is just try and move through this tutorial area as quickly as possible, because that's really what this is. Now, as you can see, we have a broken sword and we have a fireball. We do not have the ability to use the fireball yet, but we'll get to that when we get to that. So first things first, we come to our first bonfire. These are scattered all throughout the world. These are basically your checkpoints, your resting points, your safe havens. So as you can see, when you sit down at the bonfire, you have a couple of menu options. We'll get into those later when more and more of them start popping up and when we have a need to. But for now, we're just going to continue on. So if we head up these steps and open this door, we are going to run into our first boss encounter. Now, we're not going to fight this guy just yet, but if we take a couple of steps back here, we can look and see him standing on the roof, that very large demon with that very large hammer. Now, if we take a look inside the room, patience and caution are a big part of this game. We can see there's a torch over there, and we can see part of a door. So that's where we're actually going to head. So we're just going to run into the room, full sprint, go between the pots and out the door before he has a chance to even try and get in a hit. Now this will lead us to our second bonfire. Typically they are not this close together, but for tutorial purposes they are. This is actually a pretty well-designed kind of learning area. So as we move along, this area is here to teach us how to block. So you see this guy shooting arrows at us. There's no way we're going to get close without this shield. So we grab the shield, we go open up our menu, and as you can see in the menu, the game doesn't actually stop, so we could still be attacked. But what we can do is go into our change equipment, and in our left hand, we can equip our shield. Now we have a shield, we can pull this up with left bumper, and we can block his incoming arrows. And as you can see, it takes a little bit of stamina to block those arrows, but the stamina refills fairly quickly. Now as we move on up ahead here, we will find our Pyromancer's weapon, the hand axe. Every character starts with different gear and different weapons, but they'll all be found in these same locations. So now we've got our shield, we've got our hand axe, we can move up the stairs, and we can more effectively fight this enemy. So there you see he's still launching arrows at us, and we land what is known as a backstab. That is a critical hit, and yep, that's a one-hit kill on that guy. They won't always do one-hit kills like that, but these early enemies are fairly weak. So as we move out here, we can see the knight that actually tossed the key down to us is laying off in the corner of this room. So we may be wondering, how do we get to him? The door's broken. We'll see just in a minute. But as we move around this corner here, we can see at the top of this staircase, there is a ball. And you need to be wary of that, because as you walk up, it will trigger and will knock you off the staircase if you don't jump off or manage to dodge out of the way. It doesn't really do enough damage to matter, and I went ahead and let it hit me just for basically the purposes of demonstrating something. So we're going to talk to this guy, see what he has to say, and then we will talk about why I just let that thing run me over and take a quarter of my health.
You're no hollow. Thank goodness. I'm done for, I'm afraid. I'll die soon, then lose my sanity. I wish to ask something of you. You and I, we're both undead. Hear me out, will you? Regrettably, I have failed in my mission, but perhaps you can keep the torch lit. There is an old saying in my family, "Thou who art undead art chosen, and thine exodus from the Undead Asylum maketh pilgrimage to the land of ancient lords. When thou ringeth the bell of awakening, the fate of the undead thou shalt know." Well, now you know. and I can die with hope in my heart. Oh, one more thing. Here, take this. An Estus flask, an undead favorite. Oh, and this. Now I must bid farewell. I would hate to harm you after death. So go now, and thank you.
So, as you can see, he gave us a key and an Estus flask. He also told us that we should make pilgrimage and ring the Bell of Awakening. So this is what I wanted to demonstrate. The Estus flask is a healing item. Now, if we head down these stairs, we'll actually circle back around to the first bonfire that we encountered. Now, what I'm going to do very quickly is we'll press X. This uses our Estus flask, and as you can see, that refilled our health and took 1 charge off of the flask. By resting at the bonfire, you can see now we have 5 charges on the Estus flask again. And that number can go up throughout the course of the game at various bonfires, depending on certain actions that you take. So we'll get to all of that later on, but for right now, I just wanted to show exactly how that worked. Now we're going to go ahead and bring our shield up, because once again, caution and patience are very useful things to have if you're playing Dark Souls. And we're just going to land a backstab on this guy and clip him right off the stairs. So that was actually, rather fulfilling. So as we open up this gate, we're going to head out onto a balcony area, and there we can see the last piece of our gear, which in the case of a pyromancer is the pyromancy flame. The pyromancy flame is a glove that lets us use our pyromancy spells, and it can be upgraded. This is why pyromancers don't need intelligence. Boosting the level of the pyromancy flame boosts the power of your spells. So we're not going to test that out quite yet, although this part is somewhat designed to teach you how to combat multiple enemies. And this is also where they give you your first ranged weapon if your character has a ranged weapon. Just took some dumb damage there. So that you would use it possibly to take out the group of enemies in the case of the pyromancy flame, or to possibly take out the archer in the case of a bow and arrow. But we're actually going to save our fireballs because we have a boss battle coming up. The angry, angry demon that we saw earlier, he's known as the Asylum Demon, and he's still waiting for us. So the last thing we're going to do is head into this room. Now, this room is supposed to teach you how to parry attacks. I'm pretty bad at it, but managed to actually nail that one perfectly. So instead of using left bumper to block the attack, you use the left trigger and parry the attack with your shield. That only works with small and medium shields. This one here is a small shield, obviously. The larger shields, you actually get a shield bash instead. So it removes your ability to parry, but you can do some extra damage. So we haven't lost enough health to really worry about estusing. We're going to traverse this white light, which will actually lead us to the boss fight. And what we're going to want to do as soon as we get through here is tilt the camera to look down so we can make sure this guy's below us, drop off, hit the right bumper, and just land on him with a plunging attack. And then immediately lock on, clicking the right stick, swap to our Pyromancer's Flame, and now we just want to goad him into attacking so that we can pelt him with fireballs from a distance and not eat damage like that again. As you can see, just staying at the edge of his range, trying not to eat any hits, hitting him with fireballs when we can, and that is the Asylum Demon down. He's actually not that hard of a first fight if you're playing a class that actually has some ranged attacks. Now, if you're not, then he can be a bit trickier than that, trying to get in close and dodge his attacks, or in the case of a knight or a warrior, even trying to tank his attacks, which usually isn't a very good idea. So we have about... I want to keep these episodes at around 30 minutes, so we have about 10 minutes left on this episode. So I'm going to first come down here to the left and grab this Soul of a Lost Undead consumable. And we're pretty much done with the tutorial area. There is one other thing I want to show before we leave here. And if we come down here, you can see a nest out on the edge of this platform. Looks very difficult to get to. It's really kind of not. You just walk over there. You do have to be careful not to fall. But that is the nest of a character known as Snuggly the Crow. I don't know if that is his official name or just what the community has given him as a name, but you can drop certain items in that nest, and the next time you come back, Snuggly will have replaced them with a different item. It can be useful if you need something very specific, but otherwise there's really no need to ever go over to that nest. So the last thing we're going to do is walk up to the top of this hill. We're going to have another short cutscene, and this will be the last actual cutscene for quite a while. And when we get done, we will be out of the tutorial area, and we will probably go ahead and end this video. So once again, enjoy the cutscene.
Only in the ancient legends it is stated that one day an undead shall be chosen. To leave the Undead Asylum in pilgrimage to the land of the ancient lords. Lordran.
So as you can see, we've now made our way out of the tutorial area, and we are at a place called Firelink Shrine. Now, here it says, in Lordran, you can level up and kindle at bonfires. We're going to run through that real quick before we end this video. Also, it looked like there was a person sitting there. That is actually an image of another player who happens to be here at this point in time. Kind of interesting to see that. And you'll see a lot more of that stuff as we go through the game. So we're going to go ahead and rest at this bonfire, and the first thing you should notice is our Estus flask now has 10 charges. That's because this bonfire is kindled. There's a reason for that. We'll get to that momentarily. But the main thing you need to know is about humanity. So humanity is actually an item. There we are. There's a humanity. We can use that item to gain 1 humanity and restore HP. What that will do is add a 1 to our counter in the upper left-hand corner. We can then sacrifice a humanity from that counter to reverse hollowing and become human, which has its own set of benefits and downfalls, which we'll talk about when they become a bit more relevant. Once we are human, we can use 1 humanity to kindle the bonfire and make the bonfire give us 10 Estus flasks instead of 5. We can also do a few other things, such as attune magic. Now, as you can see, we have the fireball spell, but if you look at the top, we have 2 slots where we can attune magic. So the fireball spell takes up 1 slot, has 8 uses. Since it is a pyromancy, it doesn't have any intelligence or faith requirement, which is what the 2 symbols, the 2 yellow symbols with 0 next to them mean if you look at the actual pyromancy, or I'm sorry, fireball spell. And we will get more spells later on. We're going to stick with Pyromancer spells because then we can cast them all using the Pyromancy Flame and not have to carry around multiple ways to cast multiple different types of magic. The last thing we want to go over is leveling up. So leveling up costs souls. If you noticed, every time we killed something, down in the right corner we had a counter that went up. That is our number of souls. So if we go into level up, you can see our level, how many souls we have, the required souls to level up, and then all of our other statistics. Now we're going to do a very, very quick run through of the statistics here. So Vitality basically increases defenses and your number of hit points. It's one of the very most important stats. Attunement increases the number of attunement slots you can have. If you look on the right, You can see it go from attunement slots 2 to attunement slots 3 once you hit 14. We will go to a certain amount on attunement before we end up just dumping away from that stat altogether. Endurance increases your stamina, equipment load, and various defenses. Equipment load is important. We'll get to that when it becomes more relevant as well. Now, strength, dexterity, intelligence, and faith are all stats that are required to wield different varieties of weapons or spells or items within the game. So what we're mainly going to be focused on most likely is probably dexterity. And that's because of my personal choice of weapons that I prefer to use. Now, if you know, there's one other stat, resistance. This boosts poison resistance as well as several other defensive stats. It's kind of a throwaway stat because you can get pretty much the same amount of increases from almost anything else. And yes, you don't get the poison resistance from everything else, but you can get items and rings and gear that will give you more poison resistance. Plus, it's not something that you need a whole lot of in the game. If you are getting poisoned, you're probably doing something wrong unless you're in one specific area that we'll talk about later. So, not too bad for a first episode. We have made it out of the tutorial area, we've made it to Firelink Shrine, and we've talked a little bit about the basics of kind of building your character. So with that having been said, I have been your host, Jeffrey Lazarus, and thank you for watching. I'll see you guys next time.